He said, "Why do I have to work on a machine where I'm unsafe?" I said, "You don't. And no one will work on a machine that I personally wouldn't work on." We examined it. It took us a week to fix it. It was a vital machine needed to get production out the door. I don't care. We're going to show these workers that we care about them first, their safety first. American Airlines can wait for their shipment. I'll take the heat from that. We're protecting our people.
Today in the studio, we have Jim Joseph. Jim is the VP of Advancement and Innovation at Moyne College, the Dean of the Madden College of Business and Economics, has his doctorate in executive leadership, and has spent his career leading numerous domestic and international business developments. Jim, excited to have you in the studio.
I'm excited to be here, James. Thanks for inviting me. It's an honor.
So Jim, there's so many different things that you've done over your career, and there's so many things that we can talk to that I think have a lot of value for our listeners. But I want to dive in to your time with Oneida Limited, and there are some, I'm sure, some ups and downs and some milestones and some things that you've taken away from your time there. So I want you to start wherever you want to start with your time there and things that you've learned.
Well, you've hit it on the head, because at Oneida Limited, I spent half my life. I'm 62 years old, and my career at Oneida spanned over 3 decades.
Wow.
I want to zero, right? Half my life.
Quite some time, yeah.
Yes. My family grew up around the world, actually. But let's zero in on what I'll call some of the seminal moments of my time at Oneida Limited. And I would like to start when I was 30 years old. And I was the 5th person that was asked to move to Mexico. And it wasn't because I had a manufacturing background. It wasn't because, I had been in any senior leadership position at Oneida. But there was something, obviously, they saw. And obviously, wanting to do something like that is half the battle. So I was asked to move to Mexico with my young family at 30 years old. It was a turnaround situation. Factory in Toluca, Mexico. There's actually a case study written about it. And that's where my leadership really was formed or honed. It took cultural competence. It took a strategic mind, a growth mindset, humility. I learned how to listen. I learned how to understand another culture. And, I can tell the story of what took place over the 4 years that we were there and the key ingredients, so which I believe shaped the rest of my career and a good part of my life, actually. So let's start with what was encountered day one. Day one, a factory in rough shape and a little bit of disarray. And I would say morale at a low point. And that's why Oneida wanted someone to go down and turn this around.
You were 30.
I was 30 years old. So I was leaning heavily on my Jesuit education at this point. Some people said, well, good thing you had an accounting degree. No. I leaned on the other half of my education, which was the liberal arts, the languages, the humanities, the social sciences. I deployed more of that than my accounting degree in Mexico. So when I say it shaped me, this is the way I approach every new opportunity. Work on small change with the intention of building confidence and, more importantly, trust. Do that early while you're working on the bigger strategic plan that will build a sustainable organization that will go forward and flourish. I'm a people person. And even though I didn't speak the language, I would go to the factory floor every morning, 6 a.m., 400 workers, 250 on the second shift, about 100 on the third shift. I would visit everyone. And I saw things that I didn't see in Oneida, New York. Some improvements that needed to be made, whether it was safety, whether it was cleanliness. I'm not going to get into the detail. We immediately went to work to fix that. One of the big problems at Oneida Mexicana was turnover of employees. Very disruptive, very destabilizing. On paper, the factory was supposed to be making 40 million pieces of flatware a year. It was making 10. It was hemorrhaging cash. That move alone of building trust resulted in a doubling of production in the first year, 10 to 20 million. I'm rounding. We're working on the big picture behind the scenes. So what about Toluca, Mexico? What are the advantages over Asia? Because that was really the competition. Well, one advantage is your proximity. Another is a visionary president of Mexico who was working with Clinton and Mulrooney, first Senior Bush and then Clinton to get the NAFTA deal done, and that immediately took 20% duty. So if you get that, plus the proximity, you're in business. But also we need to turn the factory around production-wise. One thing that struck us early, America's an individualist society. Mexico, maybe thanks to the Bering Strait, is a collectivist society. 40 years ago, the gringos introduced an individualist incentive piece rate system that was out of sync and out of step with that culture. So we introduced to the union, one of the toughest labor unions in the world in Mexico. The leader at the time had outlived 7 Mexican presidents. We changed everything to a team bonus, and production increased by 50%.
Wow.
Now we're at 30 million after 2 years plus. How do we get to that 40 million? With the same people and the same amount of equipment. That's the only way to do it. And as we waited for NAFTA to unfold, and meanwhile, this Mexican president is heading to Central and South America to create free trade agreements so we could turn the factory and start shipping product there as well duty-free. So we saw all this happening. So we understood the context, we understood the historical context, the culture, and the feelings of the people. All of that had to be in sync. All of that had to be taken into consideration. The final piece is collaboration. Very few people. I told you at the beginning I was the 5th asked, so maybe a little ambitious, maybe even blindly ambitious if I'm honest with myself. Yeah, I'll take the job at 30.
In a country that you don't speak the language?
You're right. So let's just say maybe there was a cockiness that I've learned to deal with later in life. Let's just say that. And humility and humbling. And when we get to the doctorate, we'll talk about how much I've been humbled. So let's start bringing people from Oneida, New York to train on these machines. Let's collaborate with the home office. And we were sending waves of people to do that. By the time it was time for me to leave, and that's another important message, is to always know when it's time to leave. And I had someone who wanted my job the day I stepped in and was overlooked. And I would say to him, we're only going to be here a short time. Let's work together on this, and we'll leave, and hopefully it'll be all yours. And that's the way it ended up. He's living in Hong Kong now. So Oliver, if you're out there listening to this podcast, it was a great 4-year run together. By the time we left, the factory was making 50 million pieces. Yeah. Not 40, 50, 50. And we were invited to the White House of Mexico, Los Pinos, and President Carlos Salinas de Gortari handed us the 1994 Export Award. Not because of the products we exported, but because of how we treated the Mexican workers, how we gave them dignity, how we protected them, how we took care of them, how we listened to them. They had great ideas. We changed the corporate culture by embracing the local culture and taking care of the workers. I don't mean to come off as any great white savior. I'm not. But this was, a lesson that stayed with me forever.
It's a lot of great stuff there. One of the main things that you when you first got there, you talked about building trust. One, it's just tough as anyone coming into a different country and building trust with a company. I think just going into a company in general and building trust is difficult. How important is it for you to gain trust with your employees, and why is that important? Why is that beneficial for the whole company?
It's everything. People want to be heard, seen, and valued. And I'm here to tell you that I don't always get that right. Any leader sometimes faces those dark moments and needs to re-examine. But the main message there was no one had been listening and valuing and hearing these people. And it's not just the act of listening, it's then the action that follows the listening. And the seminal moment within the seminal moment, if you will, was when an employee stood up in our first ever communication day, which was something that was never done. This was four listening sessions in of 30 workers each. We went all the way to midnight that night. We covered all the shifts, listened to almost 700 workers in groups of 25 to 30. And he said, why do I have to work on a machine where I'm unsafe? And in my broken Spanish and in the translation from my senior team, I said, you don't. And no one will work on a machine that I personally wouldn't work on. The following morning, we all went to that machine. We didn't let it start. We examined it. It took us a week to fix it. It was a vital machine needed to get production out the door. I don't care. We're going to show these workers that we care about them first, their safety first. American Airlines can wait for their shipment of the small spoons and forks that people have used in the past. Darden restaurants can wait for that 3-tine fork that you use at Olive Garden. I'll take the heat from that. We're protecting our people. That changed everything. That was a transformational moment.
Was that just overlooked in the past? No one listened to the workers? Like, how does that even happen in the first place?
I don't want to get into the details of how that happens. That's past. But let me just say generally that sometimes leaders look at people as objects. Maybe the old phrase, pawns. We've all heard that. This was a learning moment for me, but I was drawing on the philosophy courses that I took at Moyne. I was drawing on the sociology courses I was taking at Moyne. I was drawing on the conversations that I would have with Jesuits. And that's what shaped those decisions. And I think that's part of the magic sauce.
I think now more than ever, I think people are trying to lead more with compassion. It's kind of like almost a new concept, I feel, leading with compassion a little bit more than what it used to be, because I feel like in the past it was always just do your job, do what I say, it doesn't matter kind of thing. Where now I feel like hopefully there's more of a culture of listening to the team, understanding what's happening, and moving forward together as a unit and actually listening, caring with compassion. And that was the hardest thing for me when starting the business, was like I was always in the impression of I'm going to hire people and they're just going to do what I say. And that was wrong. And I was horrible doing that. And I still struggle with that, because to me, I'm just like, just get the job done. But to actually listen and to understand and to have compassion for everyone, understand why we're in this together, really has been transformational for me, and something that I was fully against even like 5 years ago, because I wanted to kind of be a ruler, like just get this thing done. Like, why are you not getting it done? And it never worked. And I was now leading with compassion completely changed my outlook on running a business. Still not perfect at it, still struggling every day with it. But I think that has greatly improved the staff and improved how the company is moving forward.
If we were to ask the 3 people in the room with us here, would they agree with that? I'm sure they would. You're being very vulnerable right now. People want to say, this is the most important part about being a leader, is being vulnerable. Well, there are many components of being a great leader. But you've nailed it. And James, how old are you, James? Can I ask that question since I know you're probably
Absolutely.
half my age?
I'm 39.
You're 39. A lot of people don't have it figured out by 39. And you're right on. And,
I definitely don't have it figured out.
You're figuring it out, and you're right there. And another lesson, and I'd like to transition to the Oneida Limited turnaround.
Yeah.
One of the key elements of when you take over an operation, or you're given the reins, take over sounds a little aggressive. When you're given the reins of the business, some people have a tendency to just come in and throw out the baby with the bathwater, just eliminate all the top, just clean house and start anew. And that is a mistake. I think it doesn't hurt to take a look back at history. And where I'm going with this is, you probably in your wildest dreams would never read a book written in 1977, would you? And maybe many of your listeners would write off whatever was written in 19 clickety-clack doesn't apply today. But I would encourage you and everyone listening to dust off Robert Greenleaf's servant leadership. He introduced servant leadership in the late 70s, and we all know that sometimes prophets are way ahead of their time. And here we are closing in on 50 years from that. I think it was 1977. So 2027 will be the 50th anniversary of that book. And you just quoted him without knowing it. Compassion, empathy, putting the person first. The generals eat last, right? So I would encourage everybody to read that book. Now let's go to Oneida Limited.
Can I add one more thing on that?
Yeah, you can, sure.
Because I love, it's all the same stuff. At the end of the day, the fundamentals still exist. So caring, leading with compassion, Gary Vee, who's a marketer and speaker, I watched something recently and someone was like, why aren't people doing what I tell them to do? They work for me, all this kind of stuff. And then basically he's like, no, you work for them. And it's the same idea, just said differently. And it's all about changing that mindset of, no, like, we're in this together. They're looking for you to lead and you work for them. And if you can get that mindset, like you saw and identified in Mexico that there was an issue with a machine and there needed to be safety. You didn't say you fix it. You said, I'm going to fix this because you work for them. And having that mindset and that shift, I do think changes everything. Sorry.
No. Great summary. You're being a servant. Let's be really vulnerable here. Sometimes when there are deadlines, sometimes when you want to get things done, you can forget what you just said. I forget what I just said. We're imperfect beings. Moyne actually has an expert that we ended up having to share with the world. We miss him terribly every day, but he's in Rome making a huge impact. David McCullum. He has his doctorate in executive leadership from Columbia University. Maybe you've heard of it. And we all didn't want to let him go, but he's now serving the world and the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church does need to examine some of their leadership practices, and he's helping them discern through that. So I just wanted to say that. And because I'm sure there are people that could be listening to this that would say, Jim, that's, I know sometimes when you get stressed out or you get a little bit anxious, you forget to be a servant leader because you want to get things done. And that's something that we all need to continue to reevaluate.
I think there's an emergence of solo entrepreneurs and people trying to get into business, and business is almost like celebrities these days. More than ever, I feel like business owners are out there and it's exciting. I feel like there's people trying to get into their own businesses and make their own businesses, which is great. But running a business is very tough. And thinking about these things that we're talking about is something that I encourage every new entrepreneur to start thinking about sooner than later, because it's going to hit you. No matter what, it's coming. If you're growing as a business leader, you will have to deal with teams and work dynamics and culture. And these takeaways, they might seem very distant, but if you don't think about them now, like, it's really going to bite you. I've always been against all of that. Just put your head down, get your work done was always my mentality, and probably still now is, to a fault. But changing that mindset is slowly like making steps towards it. And I think also, like, the more I talk to people, I've been talking to people for a long time. I've interviewed lots of different CEOs and everything. And at the end of the day, we're all just kind of silly humans trying to figure it all out. And we're allowed to make mistakes and we're allowed to mess up. And as long as you are vulnerable and you know that you're not perfect, that's the only way that you can learn in the first place. So with that, let's transition to another key milestone at Oneida, when Oneida had to work through a Chapter 11, and you walked through that process.
Right. Well, let's just step back and give context.
Yeah.
How does one of the most iconic brands in American industrial history go bankrupt? How does the oldest publicly traded stock on the New York Stock Exchange, going back to the early 1900s, go bankrupt? How does that happen? I was called home from London. We were in London. I was running Europe. If you've worked for some organization long enough, or you've been within a certain industry long enough, it is shocking to wake up and see the vulnerabilities, and to realize that there may be an existential crisis unfolding. I was called home and given a job to run a certain division. I later learned that that move was to get me back in Oneida, New York, just in case. I never knew this, and if I knew it, I would hope that just in case never happened, because that means something really bad happened. But I had developed this reputation as the turnaround person, right? So let's first examine how Oneida Limited, that started as a commune in 1848, became a corporation in 1880, and for 130 years, was the number one brand in its category, preeminent manufacturer in the U.S. We were the first company to introduce, or one of the first, if not the first, to introduce emotional connection to a brand. We all have brands we're emotionally connected to. That didn't happen just by coincidence. There are clever marketers out there. Oneida Limited was at the forefront of innovation. Innovation. How do you innovate a fork? Well, up until the 1950s, forks weren't made out of stainless steel. They were copper, silver-plated, or sterling, etc. This was visionary. It was an innovation, but it also met the exploding baby boom, households, post-war, etc. We were one of the pioneers of market adjacency. The customer will give you permission to have a product category that is related to. So we got into the tea sets, the hollowware. That came much later than the flatware. So I'm studying the history of Oneida as I'm taking the reins. Again, work on the small stuff. I started having global town halls and spoke to everybody. Australia, the UK, Shanghai, Oneida, New York, Buffalo, New York, etc. Seen, heard, and valued. All 4,000 Oneida employees, or whatever the number was, and our suppliers, which are probably another 5,000 because of the factories, our supply chain, huge. And looking to these lessons, and then what happens? How does it happen? There are people out there that want to blame a person or two on the fate of Oneida Limited. That's totally unfair. It was a governance issue. I'm not going to go any further than that. You know, there are boards of directors. They're not just the leadership team. You know, they're blood on all of our hands. When the hedge fund seized control, they were in charge. And we all thought we were going to be cleaned out. All of us, all the leaders. And we ended up not throwing out the baby with the bathwater. You know, if you'd done that, you would have destroyed relationships. The chief sales officer could walk into Marriott or Royal Caribbean Cruise Line or Hilton unannounced and get a meeting. You don't throw that away. Some of our mistakes were marketing mistakes. So you transition a person out and a new one in who brings in fresh perspective. So you're not, right? We had a supply chain expert that knew Asia like the back of his hand. You don't throw that person out. That was part of building the team and gaining trust and listening to people.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's all this keeps coming back to just listening and hearing everyone that works in the company and working with them to come up with a solution together.
Right, exactly. And then, obviously, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work. We went out of our way to ensure that every single pensioner still receives their pension to the penny. When they open their pension check, it says PBGC at the top, Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. We had to negotiate that, and our pension liability moved there. So that was a huge move, and that also, you're talking about a small town where 3,000 retirees is a good chunk of the population, and the rest of the population is either friends or related to that person. So that's sent confidence.
So you've been involved with Madden College for a decade and more and some change. Talk to me about what Madden College stands for, some of the things they're teaching there, and how it's evolved over those last 10 years.
Right. The one thing I want to go back to Oneida, because I didn't close the loop, I listed the reasons that Oneida was great, and then I talked about the people. Let's go back to the emotional branding. We started a whole new ad campaign. We did not forget our roots. We emotionally connected with, re-engaged the consumer, if you will, and so that was one. The adjacency issue, we launched a brand of pots and pans under Oneida, glassware, cutlery, a whole slew. So this is part of the comeback. We talked about how the company was built. So I want to just make sure I close that loop, that we actually did a lot of those things, not just listen to the workers. There was strategy involved. I almost forgot to talk about that. So what are we doing here? What we're doing here is we're going back to what made us great, and we're re-examining, and we're saying, hey, all those elements made us great. All those elements can help turn this place around. We kind of forgot our roots. That's kind of the message I'm trying to say. So there's don't throw the baby out with the bathwater as far as history and strategy and what made you great, as well as the people that have contributed. Don't, make sure that you are you're maintaining the people that make the business go. So I just want, and the innovation piece, there has been a lot of innovation since the turnaround. Now, the people sitting in Oneida, New York, see that the factory is still operating. Thank God for Greg Owens and Matt Roberts and their vision. That's not Oneida Limited. We sold that factory to them. They have built their own brand. They've got a couple hundred employees. They're growing and thriving, and I love what they're doing. Oneida is the brand. Oneida, the brand, now is sitting in, some of it's sitting in Columbus, Ohio. We sold to Anchor Hockey and Glass, the owners of Anchor Hockey and Glass, and we've split between the food service brand and the consumer brand. I'm not getting into the weeds, but just know that there was also that other strategy. I went through the strategy as far as the turnaround of Mexico. I want to make sure that the other strategy is understood as well. Because Oneida, at the end of, we emerged from bankruptcy, and the brand was again #1 in the marketplace. Even though it's not being made in Oneida, New York anymore, so it's kind of a tale of two cities, if you will.
I think the way that you started off that story, saying how does a company like this end up in Chapter 11? How does a company like this fail? It's been around for, tens and, a bunch of years. How does that happen? What would you tell either a small company, 10 people or less, or a big company when they're working through these times of, oh, crap?
Oh, crap.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that the oh, crap part shouldn't happen. Shouldn't happen as far as a surprise. The oh, crap seems to be, when you say that, it seems to be an element of surprise. If you are being honest with your 3,000, 4,000 workers and say we're the only manufacturer of a certain product in the U.S., can be a point of pride, but it can also be wait a minute, why is that? Have low-tech products taking a piece of metal and beating it into a fork, I'm simplifying, why is everybody else doing that in Asia? Why is our factory in Mexico so successful? And that doesn't mean that you have to ship everything overseas. When you get into a crisis, the oh crap again suggests that the crisis is upon you as opposed to foreseeing it. And again, not one person is to blame for not foreseeing that crisis. Had we had the town halls, had we had the honest conversation, there was an element of avoidance. Now, it's easy to sit here in a nice studio and talk about avoidant behavior and not really give the context of a small town American company, let's make it general, where everybody knows everybody, either through relations or friendships or running into the stores, and then confronting the difficult truth that maybe some of this production doesn't belong in Oneida, New York, it does belong overseas. Because that means potential layoffs, disruption to families, not to be taken lightly. But if you do avoid it, and you avoid it for too long, and you find yourself in a crisis, then more than just a few hundred people lose their jobs. Now it becomes an existential crisis, and you're overreacting or reacting as opposed to being in control of the strategy. And you find yourself moving everything offshore, and that is hugely disruptive. So, painful lesson.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's important to self-analyze your company, see what's going wrong, so then you can be preventative.
Well, that's the beauty of the SWOT analysis. Had we done that, again, we, collectively, the board, the leadership team, had we every year said, what are our strengths? What are our weaknesses? What are our opportunities? And what are our threats? If we had really dug deep on the threats, if we had really dug deep, we would have seen this coming, or would have shared it coming with everybody. And every leader knows this. We don't have all the answers. Thank God we don't. What's the saying? If you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. So don't dismiss or think for 1 minute that there's not somebody out on the factory floor that may have a better answer. I learned that in Mexico. Why do I have to work on a machine that is not safe, It makes me feel, and say, you don't. You absolutely don't. And that triggered change throughout the entire factory and practices.
Great. Okay, so let's jump to your time at Madden College. Madden College, you've been working with Madden College for over a decade. Talk to me about what Madden College stands for, what you're trying to teach there, and how has business or that college changed over the last 10 years?
Moyne College, my alma mater, class of 83. Never for 1 minute believed that I would be sitting here talking to you about this when I left the campus 41 years ago, this coming spring. So it wasn't the Madden College 10 years ago. Mike Madden named the college, gave a transformational gift in 2012. I was asked to stay by President Lemura, who was then provost, to consider staying and trying out higher ed. You talk about servant leadership. You talk about working for the faculty. I say it all the time. And there you are, not the smartest person in the room. You're in a room full of PhDs, of brilliant, caring, I want to say that too, human beings that have given their life, they've dedicated their life so far to their passion, to their scholarship, to their area of expertise. So there is a tremendous amount of respect the minute you walk in that door. And thank goodness, again, not perfectly, I practiced servant leadership in the corporate world, but it was still a transition and a little bit of a wake-up call for me, I have to admit. And I hope they're all listening to me. And I don't always get it right. And they're all shaking their heads yes. So what has transpired over this past decade? Let's look at the lessons of the past. Collaboration. You heard me say that all the way back in Mexico. One of the first things we did is we already had a couple of advisory boards, but and I love that model, and create an advisory board for every single major, as well as one for the school, which is now the Madden College. What did that produce? 250, an army of 250 volunteers. And from that 250 emerged people that wanted to share their fortune and join the party with Mike Madden. Dan McNeil, let's create a risk management academy, which we're going to rename the Risk Management Institute. Here's $7 million. Go at it. The Keenans, let's start an entrepreneurship center. Entrepreneurship, innovation, and creativity. To date, here's $4 million. Joe Savage, we shut down the JV basketball program together. His father was the only NBA player out of Lemoyne first class. My father was a great athlete. He was a better human being. Let's start a center for reflective leadership and ethics. Savage McGill. And on and on. It is an ecosystem of alumni and business leaders. Many of these boards, we have a lot of alumni, but we also have business leaders that have all rallied, all 250 of them, around this amazing faculty. And it also becomes a recruiting tool for faculty. I want to be part of that. Everybody wants to be part of this. It's amazing. And then one day you wake up and you've got 4 programs that are ranked 50th in the country. And and out of the 820 private universities that have a business school, small private schools, as U.S. News and World Report, and your business school out of those 820 small private schools is now ranked 10th in the country out of 820. Thank you to the 250 people that have volunteered their time, their treasure, their talent, their compassion, their passion for Moyne College and the Madden College. Thank God for the nearly 35 faculty members we have now across 9 majors that get up every morning to first be teachers, to be mentors to our great students. That gives me the best job in the world with awesome responsibility because it's my alma mater. I have a responsibility to those faculty, and I have a responsibility to those 250.
How have you seen business change over the last 10 years? Has there been any differences in education, either from what you've seen from over your vast career to what's being taught now? What are we teaching our future leaders that you think is really important?
I think the rest of this is part of my dissertation. I think the rest of the world is finally catching up with Jesuit business education, which becomes a challenge for us because obviously we are the first mover, but we have to continue to differentiate. So everything we talked about before, servant leadership, compassion, bringing compassion to the workplace, bring empathy to your leadership, making people seen, heard, and valued. We have our largest major now at the Madden College is our management and leadership program. And these are, some people want to call them the soft skills. No. They're the essential skills. And the more technology, which is a huge change for business, right? FinTech, who the heck would have thought that? AI, who would have thought that? Well, you've got all this technology. There's also responsibility. There are ethical issues. Now, every student at the Madden College, we just passed this 2 years ago, maybe a little bit less. Every student now has to take applied ethics. Going to Moyne College, you need to take the classics, 2 courses in the classics. We've added applied ethics for every single one of our students, and we're now in conversations with the philosophy department. I want every single Madden College student to come out with their business degree, with their expertise, and with a minor in philosophy and ethics. You talk about a differentiator, but let's go back. How the world is changing. Everybody recognizes now that servant leadership, transformational leadership, all of the essential skills we just talked about are paramount for success. And this new generation, Generation Z, are demanding it. I am not going to work for an organization that doesn't treat me like a human being. I am not going to work for an organization that does not align with my values. So for all the leaders out there listening, and I don't mean to be a mansplainer here, you probably already know this, but the name of the game is seen, heard, and valued, compassion, and that's what's taught at the Madden College. That's what's taught at the 100 Jesuit universities around the world. And I've got empirical data to prove that because that was part of my dissertation. I interviewed Jesuit school, business school deans from every corner of the planet, from all 6 Jesuit conferences. When I say the rest of the world is catching up with us, in 2019-20 at Davos, the economic summit, they came out with a white paper on rethinking business, rethinking business's role in society. Jamie Dimon and 180 plus CEOs signed a document rethinking stakeholder value versus shareholder value. It's not just about lining the shareholders' pockets. It's taking into consideration all the stakeholders. So when I take you back to Mexico and my focus was stakeholders, I didn't even know that was a thing. That's what I was, sometimes I get emotional when I talk about Lemoyne. That's what I learned at Lemoyne. We just didn't have a name for it yet, right? Your employees, your customers, the planet, not just the shareholders. That's what we teach. That's what these Jesuit universities teach. And the business world is finally catching up with us. And now AACSB, the greatest accreditation body, the number 1 accreditation body for business schools, is now introduced a new standard. Standard 9, 2020 standards. Standard 9, societal impact, societal engagement and impact. What is your school doing to protect the planet, to protect its people? What are your scholars researching? What are they writing about? What is your business school doing in the community? How are you lifting pockets of a community out of poverty? We have a very close relationship with Hassan Stevens and the Good Life Youth Foundation. He's a living saint, one of my favorite human beings. He's our entrepreneur in residence at the Keenan Center.
Oh, really?
And he brings his kids to our on weekends, and one of them actually joined the Dolphin Tank last year and won money because she's amazing, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, business with a heart and soul, a business school with a heart and soul. That's the Madden College.
I love that. There's so much more I want to talk to you about, but we wrap every podcast up with 3 quick questions. So
I can't wait.
let me hit these questions up for you. Can you tell me a favorite book of yours? I know you already mentioned one. Maybe you can mention something different, and
Maybe
why.
something a little more contemporary than 1970s. So, well, let's just start by saying the doctoral program was a 4.5-year grind. Not a lot of time to read books, but if you're pressing me on this, I would say Doris Kearns Goodwin's A Team of Rivals. And that's actually about, many people probably have read it and many admirers of Lincoln. But beyond that, it's really about collaborating with people that have a different opinion than you do. And it's interesting it's interesting his genius, because if we think about it, he made the losers of those elections and the people that were trying to be president, he allowed them to be seen, heard, and valued. These great people, these powerful people, which shows what you said earlier about we're just these creatures trying to figure it out. I don't care how great you are. We all put on our clothes in the morning and get up and try to do the best we can, right? And also, I think he was smart enough to know that he won by a razor's edge, margin. There was no landslide here. And it's too bad that we don't have politicians that are more like that are not afraid to listen. I think we've become too divisive.
All right. So you had an amazing career. You're still at it. You're still educating. You're still have so much passion for the community. What keeps you passionate?
Until you have a chance to give back to an institution that means everything to you, it's difficult to understand. Moyne College transformed me, right? And this small town kid, we do this every day. We take students from here to here. We make them believe in themselves. We help them believe in themselves. We don't make them. We help them believe. We enable them to believe in themselves. We empower them to believe in themselves. The opportunity to have that impact, that is a fire that is an eternal flame. That is an eternal flame. I joke that they're going to have to carry me out feet first, but I know that's probably not realistic either. I've said to people, I'll get out of the way, or they'll move me out of the way. But I would like to still teach leadership, until my last breath, if I'm relevant, that is. So that's passion right there. You just heard it, unfettered. Mexico turned me into a global thinker, an appreciation and lover of cultures. And my seat on the International Association of Jesuit Business Schools Board, I was just elected for a fourth 3-year term. Allows me to interact with every corner of the planet. That keeps me passionate too.
Great. Last question. What excites you most about Central New York right now?
It seems to me, and sometimes when you're so busy and your head down, you don't pay attention as much as maybe you should to local news, especially when you're working full time and going through a doctoral process. But it seems to me that this community, the leaders in this community, are rowing in the same direction. It feels that way. Who the heck can't be excited about Micron? Who can't be excited about 9,000 direct jobs, maybe 40,000?
Good jobs.
Great jobs. So, I'm on a board in Austin, Texas. I'm actually the lead director of a publicly traded board in Austin, Texas. And Austin, Texas area was came in number 2. And so I quietly listened when I was in restaurants or even at the board meeting about how people were very upset about losing Micron to Syracuse, New York. And then I reminded them that we have incredible institutions of higher learning. They forget that Cornell's an hour from here. They forget that University of Rochester is an hour and a half from here. They forget that the great SUNY schools. They forget that Syracuse University is here. They forget that Moyne College is here. And a lot of those Micron, I can't wait for these genius, brilliant engineers and scientists to knock on our door and say, I'm a genius, brilliant scientist that would like to get my MBA in leadership at the Madden College, because I hear you talk about things like compassion and servant leadership and essential skills. And if I'm honest with myself, I could use an advanced degree in that that'll help me lead people and share all my brilliance and enable other people to reach different levels.
Thank you, Jim. A lot of great stuff there. Thanks for joining us today. If you want to learn more about Jim, you can follow him on LinkedIn at Jim Joseph, and be sure to follow In the Studio with 325 for more conversations with extraordinary people like Jim Joseph every Monday. Jim, that was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.